Get ready, everyone, because today we're diving deep, and I mean deep, into the world of multiple sclerosis, MS. It's a condition, as many of you know, that affects millions around the world, and we're going to break it all down, the science, the facts, and even tackle some of those lingering MS myths out there.
I'm ready to dive in. It's a complex disease, but we're making incredible strides in understanding it.
Exactly, and that's what we're here to do today. Unpack it all. So let's not waste any time. For anyone who's maybe less familiar, can you give us a quick breakdown of what MS actually is?
Okay, so at its core, MS is a disease that affects the central nervous system. Think of your brain and spinal cord as like a complex system of wires, right? Sending signals all over your body.
Yeah.
And those wires, they need protection, insulation to work properly. That's where myelin comes in.
Myelin, that rings a bell. It's what, like a fatty substance?
Spot on. Myelin acts like insulation around those nerve fibers, making sure those signals zip around quickly and smoothly. But in MS, the immune system, the body's defense system, it kind of goes haywire. It starts attacking this myelin as if it's a foreign invader.
So it's like the immune system gets confused and turns against the body.
Exactly. And that attack, it leads to inflammation and damage to the myelin, which disrupts those nerve signals. Hence, multiple sclerosis. Sclerosis refers to the scarring that happens to the myelin because of this attack, and multiple because it can affect multiple places throughout the central nervous system.
So the multiple NMS, it's not just multiple symptoms, it's multiple sites of damage.
You got it. It's like having multiple little glitches in your wiring all over the nervous system.
That makes a lot more sense now. But here's the thing that always gets me. If this myelin damage is at the root of MS, why isn't everyone walking around with it? Who's more likely to be affected?
The million-dollar question. Globally, about 2.9 million people are living with MS. And you're right, it's not everyone, so there's definitely something else going on. What we do know is that it's most often diagnosed in young adults, think 30s, 40s.
Really? I always thought of MS as something that affected people later in life.
It's a common misconception. The average age of diagnosis is actually around 32, although we are seeing more cases diagnosed in childhood and later adulthood now, too.
32? Wow. Okay, so younger adults. But are there any other patterns?
Well, we also see a significant gender disparity. Women are 2 to 4 times more likely to develop MS than men.
Wow, that's huge. Any ideas why that is? Hormones?
That's a big question. Hormones could play a role, definitely a theory being explored, but it's probably a combination of factors. Genetics might be involved, and even environmental factors seem to play a part. For example, your geographical location seems to impact your risk.
So where you live influences your chances of getting MS? What, like certain areas are MS hotspots?
It's more nuanced than that, but location does seem to matter. We see a lot of variation in MS prevalence depending on where you are in the world.
Okay, so we've got location, we've got gender, and even age seems to factor in. Are we any closer to figuring out what actually triggers this whole immune system malfunction in the first place?
We're getting there. There are 2 prime suspects that have emerged. The Epstein-Barr virus, you probably know it as EBV, and vitamin D deficiency.
EBV, like the thing that causes mono?
That's the one. And this is where it gets interesting. EBV is incredibly common. Studies show over 90% of adults worldwide have been infected at some point. But clearly, not everyone with EBV gets MS, thankfully.
Okay, so having EBV doesn't mean you're doomed, but how are they connected?
Well, here's the thing. EBV is sneaky. It can actually hide out in the body, particularly in immune cells called B cells. Some researchers believe that this long-term presence of EBV might be what sometimes triggers that immune system mix-up, leading it to attack the myelin.
So it's like EBV is hanging around in the shadows, potentially confusing the immune system. Kind of creepy when you put it like that. What about the other suspect, the vitamin D deficiency?
Ah, yes, vitamin D. So crucial for a healthy immune system. And interestingly, studies have linked low vitamin D to a higher risk of autoimmune diseases, including MS riot.
So could getting enough vitamin D actually protect against MS?
That's what researchers are trying to figure out. One theory is that sufficient vitamin D might help keep the immune system in check, preventing it from going rogue and attacking the body's tissues.
Right, like keeping those immune system soldiers in line. So all that talk about geographical location earlier, that probably ties into vitamin D and sunlight exposure, right?
Exactly. Our bodies produce vitamin D naturally when we're exposed to sunlight. People living closer to the equator, getting more sun, tend to have higher vitamin D levels.
Makes sense. But hold on, if it's all about where you live and vitamin D, why don't we see more cases in, like, sunny Florida? There's got to be more to the story, right? What about genetics? Does that come into play too?
It does. But it's not as straightforward as, say, inheriting your eye color. Having a family history of MS does slightly increase your risk, but it's not a guarantee. Even if a parent or sibling has MS, your overall risk is still relatively low.
So genetics might make you a bit more susceptible, but it's not the whole picture. What does that mean for people trying to make sense of their own risk?
It means MS is complex, and there's no single answer. It's likely a combination of factors, genes, environment, even past infections, that all come together in a perfect storm to trigger the disease.
A perfect storm. So it's not just one thing, it's a whole bunch of things possibly lining up in just the wrong way. That makes it even trickier to pin down, doesn't it?
It does, and it's what makes MS research so challenging but also so important. But we're making progress, and that's what matters.
So last we left off, we were starting to unravel the mysteries of MS, those risk factors, that perfect storm idea. But I know there are different types of MS, right? Each with its own, I don't know, personality almost.
That's a good way to put it. MS isn't a one-size-fits-all diagnosis.
So let's break them down. We briefly touched on relapsing remitting MS, RRMS. It's the most common, if I remember correctly.
It is. About 85% of people with MS are initially diagnosed with RRMS.
Okay, so RRMS, what's going on there?
So picture it like this. You're on a roller coaster. There are ups and downs, periods of intense activity followed by calmer stretches.
Okay, I'm visualizing it. Keep going.
In RRMS, people experience these periods of new symptoms or worsening of existing ones. We call these relapses or exacerbations. And they're followed by periods of partial or complete recovery. Those are the remissions.
So the MS symptoms flare up, then calm down, then maybe flare up again later.
You got it. And the thing is, those relapses, they can be different for everyone. Some people might only experience a handful over many years, while others have them more frequently. It's unpredictable.
So even within this one type, there's a lot of variation. And what about during the remissions? Do people generally feel back to normal?
It really depends.
Yeah.
Some people have complete symptom resolution. Yeah, they feel like themselves again. But for others, lingering symptoms are possible.
So even the remission part isn't always straightforward. Okay, so that's RRMS, roller coaster. Got it. What about the other types?
Well, in contrast to the unpredictable nature of RRMS, we've got primary progressive MS, or PPMS. And with this one, it's more of a steady progression of symptoms from the beginning. No distinct relapses and remissions.
So less roller coaster, more like, I don't know, an escalator, always moving in one direction.
Yeah, you could say that. And unfortunately, PPMS tends to be more disabling, and that disability can happen earlier in the disease course.
Okay, so PPMS, definitely a tougher one to deal with. Are there others?
There's also secondary progressive MS, or SPMS, and this one often develops in people who initially had RRMS. So they start with that relapse-remitting pattern, but then at some point, things shift, and they start experiencing a more progressive worsening of symptoms, even without those clear relapses.
So it's like RRMS transitioning into a more progressive form.
Right. It's like the disease changes its course. And finally, there's clinically isolated syndrome, CIS.
This one sounds familiar. I feel like I've heard of it, but I can't quite place it.
It's kind of like a first warning sign. With CIS, someone has a single episode of neurological symptoms that lasts for at least 24 hours. And those symptoms, they're caused by inflammation and demyelination in the central nervous system, just like in MS.
So it's like a one-time MS-like event.
In a way, yeah. But here's the thing. Not everyone with CIS will go on to develop full-blown MS. Some people, they have that one episode and that's it, while others do eventually get diagnosed with MS.
Wow, so it's a real wait-and-see situation with all these different types, and the fact that the symptoms can be so varied. Diagnosing MS must be a real challenge, right?
It can be, absolutely. There's no single test that says definitively you have MS. Doctors rely on a combination of things: medical history, neurological exams, and specialized tests like MRIs to put the pieces together.
MRIs, those are the big tunnel-like machines, right? Always a bit nerve-wracking.
That's the one. But they're incredibly useful when it comes to MS because they allow us to actually visualize the brain and spinal cord. We could look for those telltale signs of MS activity, like areas of inflammation or damage to the myelin.
So like a window into the brain, helping to connect the dots. That's incredible. It's amazing how technology has revolutionized how we understand diseases like this.
That's true. And speaking of advancements, let's shift gears a bit and talk about treatment. We all know there's no cure for MS yet, but what can people do to manage their symptoms, maybe even slow down the progression?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Where does hope fit into this picture?
There is a lot of hope, and I really mean that. We've made remarkable progress in MS treatment, especially in the last few decades. We now have disease-modifying therapies, DMTs for short, and these can have a huge impact on the course of the disease, especially for people with RMS.
Okay, DMTs, those are like the big guns then.
In a way, yes. They work by calming down that overactive immune system, trying to stop it from attacking the myelin in the first place.
So it's like they're telling those confused immune cells, stand down, everyone, we're on the same team here.
Exactly. And there are different types of DMTs, each with their own mechanism and potential side effects. So finding the right one is really a team effort between the patient and their doctor.
Personalized medicine at its finest.
Absolutely. And beyond the DMTs, we also have a whole toolbox of other therapies to manage those specific symptoms that come with MS: fatigue, muscle weakness, pain, bladder problems, you name it.
So we're talking medications, but also things like physical therapy, cognitive therapy, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's about addressing the whole person, their physical needs, but also their emotional and cognitive well-being.
A holistic approach, I like that. This is all so encouraging to hear. It really does sound like we've come a long way.
We have, and research is ongoing. We're constantly learning more about MS, refining treatments, and searching for even better solutions.
It's amazing to hear about all the progress being made. You know, despite the fact that there's no cure yet, it sounds like there's still so many reasons to be hopeful, so many avenues to explore.
Absolutely, and that's what I always try to emphasize. It's not just about managing symptoms. It's about improving people's quality of life, empowering them to live their best lives with MS.
I love that. Empowering people. Knowledge is a big part of that too, right?
Huge. The more people understand about MS, the different types, those risk factors we talked about, the treatment options, the more equipped they are to advocate for themselves, work with their doctors, make informed decisions.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. So we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the science behind MS to the cutting-edge research. What are some key takeaways you hope our listeners walk away with today?
I think the biggest one is that MS is complex, but it's not insurmountable. There's a lot we still don't know. But research is constantly evolving our understanding and opening new doors for treatment and prevention.
It's a journey for sure, but one that people don't have to face alone.
Exactly. There's a whole community of support out there, researchers, healthcare professionals, people living with MS, and you're not alone.
Beautifully said. This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of MS, and I hope everyone listening feels a little more informed, a little more empowered, and definitely more hopeful about the future of MS research and care.
I second that.
Until next time, stay curious, everyone.